these unresolved puzzles in our chronology, not only in the Western chronology also. If you go to second millennium BC, everything is, you can roughly say it, there is no way you can give any absolute dates. The first problem was in our traditional, the Mahabharata war occurred somewhere 32nd century BC. Buddha's date was somewhere 19th and 18th century BC. Then Mahapadmananda after 1500 years. Then Mauryas. Then Adi Shankaracharya in 6th century BC. This was our traditional chronology before the arrival of the colonial rulers in India. But what modern textbooks teach us, that Mahabharata war, they have no date, nothing, because they think whether it may be mythical, it may be historical, whatever it is, but they don't have any date. They start with the Buddha. Beyond Buddha, it is prehistory, means we don't have any chronological history. And this led to a chronological error of 1381 years. When you date Buddha 483 BC, traditional date what I have arrived at 1864 BC, the Nirvana, the difference is 1381 years. It's a huge chronological problem. The second puzzle is the traditional history before the arrival of colonial rulers. Vikramaditya 57 BC, thousands of inscriptions we have, epigraphic evidence, literary evidence that existence of the King Vikramaditya in the first century BC, and Navaratnas. And there is a enormous evidence, epigraphic and the literature, they indicate two Shaka Samvats existed. But in modern textbooks, only one Shaka Samvat 78 AD. So naturally, they said that when Kalidasa, even Varahamira, they're referring to Shaka Samvat, how can you date in the first century BC? We had no answer because we have forgotten the ancient epoch of the Shaka Samvat. So I have established that there was an ancient Shaka Samvat that commenced in 583 BC. Second was an astronomical epoch commenced in 78 AD. Inadvertently mixed up the both because entire South India, they referred to any Samvat as a Shaka. Even today, they say Shaka means it is synonymous to era. This is a massive problem, mixing up the two epochs into one. 661 years of chronological history has been brought forward. Then another problem is the Chandragupta of Ujjain. There was another Chandragupta, who was a Gupta Chandragupta, means the Malava Guptas, and it is he was a disciple of Bhadrabahu. But the problem is the disciple of Bhadrabahu has been identified as Chandragupta Maurya based on the Hemachandras, because Jain historians, later Jain historians, because in the Harivansha Purana, Tiloya Pannati, there is no reference of Mauryas. They refer to Shaka Murundas only. And later, the Hemachandra and Jain historians identified Chandragupta, the disciple of Bhadrabahu, who became Jain monk. His name was Vishakhacharya, and they came to Shravanabelgola in Karnataka. Still, there is a Chandragupta cave and the Bhadrabahu cave. Still, you can go and visit those places. But this mistaken identification made Buddha and Mahavira contemporaries. So there was a difference of more than 600 to 700 years between Buddha and Mahavira. They were not contemporaries. These two mistakes led to another additional, the total 1381 years chronological problem. Another problem, this has been created by the colonial rulers. They wanted to identify who was the Sandracotus, because they came here to find the roots and evidences about the Alexander's invasion. But tradition, there is no reference of Alexander in Indian tradition because it's a very minor event. So we had no, and it has nothing to do with our chronology. But as per traditional chronology, it was somewhere 1600 BC. This was the date of Chandragupta Maurya as per our traditional sources. Now the problem is we have dated Alexander in 323 BC. How we have dated? Just we have assumed that first date is the Jesus birth. So Alexander died 323 years before Jesus birth. That's why 323 BC. Now this problem is actually because traditional Indian chronology has nothing to do with the Greece chronology at all. We followed Indian sheet anchors, all eras, even from the Yudhishthira Samvat, and we have a Kali Yuga Samvat, and numerous Indian epochs. Based on that, we had our chronology. But since there are numerous references in the Western sources about the Alexander's invasion to during the time of Chandragupta. Now the problem is when you date Alexander 323, then Puranic chronology is totally fictitious. So, colonial rulers they gave more weightage to the Western sources and then rejected the traditional sources that your chronology is totally wrong. So they came up to the chronology up to because they identified Sandrakotas is the Chandragupta Maurya. So that's why Chandragupta Maurya has to be dated 323 BC, around 1 or 2 years plus minus. With that assumption, you have brought forward the Indian chronology by 1300 years, and then you have a huge gap between Mahabharata and then you have rejected every history beyond Buddha as just as a prehistory or a mythical, or it's just you have winded up from Vedas to Buddha within 1000 years, then declared that Vedas were written somewhere 1500 to 1000 BC.